There is a silent exodus underway. People who wake up to a deeper inner life are quietly stepping away from the center of social performance. They are closing accounts, leaving loud careers, choosing solitude over small talk. Carl Jung named this move long ago as a necessary withdrawal within the individuation process. It is not petty avoidance. It is an archetypal response when a growing consciousness finds ordinary life physiologically painful. In this video, I will show why this disappearance is not escapism, why it is a psychotherapeutic preservation of integrity, and how to tell when withdrawal is healing and when it is avoidance. I will bring Jungian frames, clinical snapshots, and practical signs for your life. If you have felt the pull to slip into the margins, you are not alone. Stay with me to understand when leaving is a cure and when it is a symptom to study. Then go ahead and activate the notification bell, follow the channel to help me, and share it with a friend who enjoys this type of content. Carl Jung gives us language for what we are seeing. He spoke of individuation as a slow realignment of psyche and world, and he described withdrawal as a protective arcing of the soul away from collective demands. The persona is the social mask that allows daily life to function. When consciousness sharpens, the persona begins to feel like a costume that chokes. The shadow grows louder as projections ricochet back from family systems, workplaces, and social media. This pattern is not moral failure, it is archetypal. When enough internal tension accumulates, the psyche mobilizes withdrawal so that integration can occur without constant re-injury. Think of it as a regulated retreat that the psyche demands in order to process shadow material. Jungian clinicians see this again and again in patients who develop somatic pain, chronic fatigue, or dissociative narrowing after sustained mismatch between inner demands and outer roles. What are the psychological mechanics at play? First, the body speaks. Insomnia, stomach tightness, a grinding jaw, and a foggy attention are common signals that consciousness is straining under dissonant social demands. Second, projection intensifies. The awakened person perceives collective blind spots and feels blamed for pointing them out. Third, energy economics matters. Maintaining a finely tuned inner life in settings organized around distraction consumes psychological energy until the system becomes unsustainable. Consider a teacher who learns trauma-aware practice and then has to perform scripted lessons without space for real human response. The teacher experiences moral exhaustion not because they lack resilience, but because their inner map no longer matches the institutional terrain. Clinically, we call this somatic alarm, and psychotherapies that honor embodiment and shadow integration become crucial. This is why leaving is sometimes preservation rather than surrender. Projection and the collective shadow explain why participation becomes impossible. When a person refuses to collude with denial, they become a lightning rod for projection. Political debates on social media show this pattern in spades. A community projects its unwanted traits onto that person and isolates them. Psychologically, this is the social defense of a group that lacks the capacity for introspection. The result is a feedback loop. Projection increases resistance, which increases withdrawal. The archetypal hermit appears not as a loner by choice, but as a necessary margin for processing pain. The hermit is not an escape artist, but an integral function of cultural homeostasis. If you are hearing a human story now, here are two concrete vignettes that make the dynamic visible. First, Maya, a corporate strategist, began to feel a visceral recoil in meetings. The room smelled of cold coffee, and the fluorescent lights felt like accusation. She began to mute herself during presentations and later stopped attending the weekly leadership ritual. Scene 1 in the therapist's office provides a close view and a sensory layer. Maya: I feel exhausted after every meeting, like my chest is locked. Therapist Elena: what happens when you try to speak up in those rooms, Maya? They laugh or change the subject, and I go hot, then cold. Therapist: do you notice physical sensations before you leave the meeting? My hands shake and my mouth becomes paper dry. Therapist: when you leave the room, what do you do? I scroll through my phone until my head quiets down, and then I go home and sleep. Therapist: what if the withdrawal is allowed as part of your healing? It feels dangerous and also like oxygen. For this scene, there are 2 to 3 sensory notes, enough to make the psychological stakes felt. The room hums with a low air conditioner. The therapist stirs tea, and Maya rubs the inside of her wrist as if grounding herself. Second vignette is a workplace confrontation with dialogue that shows social refusal. Daniel, a junior doctor, confronts a senior manager, Sophia, about rushed discharges. The corridor smelled of antiseptic and shoes clicked on linoleum. Daniel: we are sending patients home too soon. Sophia: that is the protocol. Daniel: the protocol ignores patient stories. Sophia: you cannot change policy on feeling. Daniel: I am not asking to change policy. I am asking for time. Sophia: time is a resource we do not have. Daniel: then let me volunteer to pilot a different shift. That will not be supported. The exchange ends with Daniel walking to a window, feeling the sun sharp on his face, and deciding to step back. The scene contains sensory notes: the metallic taste of the coffee on the desk, the rustle of paper, and the echo of shoes in the hall. Names recur in the narrative to show community and contrast. Maya, Elena, Daniel, Sophia, Carlos, Priya, Marcus all appear in specific actions to remind us this is not a lone drama, but a shared pattern. There are side characters who illustrate projection. Carlos, a manager who deflects. Priya, a colleague who withdraws into online activism. Marcus, a friend who invites reconnection. Each name is attached to a movement in the story to ground the pattern in relational reality. The persona problem makes ordinary roles intolerable. Persona performance requires energy, and rituals of small talk, mimicry, and smiling on cue become acts of will. In a crowded conference room, the taste of stale coffee, the itch of a wool sweater, and the buzz of a projector can feel like assault when your inner life needs contemplative silence. The persona collapses under the weight of authenticity. People start to limit social windows to conserve energy. They cultivate margins instead of centers and find pockets of life where depth is tolerated. This is not antisocial rebellion. It is a recalibration of where the life force is spent. Energy exhaustion is central. A woman I will call Priya, who taught meditation, experienced chronic fatigue after years of trying to hold space in a school that demanded test scores above presence. She could no longer carry her mindful posture through the fluorescent halls. Her breath tightened, her vision narrowed, and her patience thinned. Withdrawal allowed her body to restore rhythm. She took 3 months off, moved to a small town, and practiced simple daily movement and quiet. The early months felt like unproductive listlessness, and then slow integration began. Sleep regulated, digestion improved, and her voice returned with new textures. Clinically, this resembles the hermit phase of gestation, where creative psychic work happens away from performance venues. The hermit archetype reframes withdrawal as preparation. In solitude, the psyche can gestate insights, assimilate shadow content, and recompose a persona that can re-enter society differently. This is individuation in action. The person returns to margins, not to grand stage appearances, but to roles that allow integrity. Elena, the therapist, returns to community teaching, small groups where conversation is slower and deeper. Carlos, the manager, moves to a consulting role that honors longer timelines. The hermitage is not forever. For most people, it is seasonal. It stores attention and wisdom for later re-engagement. If this resonates, breathe a moment and share in the comments. If this echoes your experience, write "I felt this" and name the place you feel it: work, social media, or family. Keep it to one short paragraph. Your reply matters because it builds a map of who is withdrawing and why. The community reading your note will find relief in seeing that they are not the only ones. And I read comments that give me signals for future videos. I will answer or highlight replies that show practical steps taken. Thank you for contributing. Now we return to practical signs and steps you can try if you feel the pull. There are practical markers to decide if withdrawal is healthy. Ask, does solitude restore your energy or deepen avoidance? Does your body relax while alone, or do you spiral into rumination? Do you have supportive relationships you can return to after silence? If withdrawal supports processing of shadow material,
then it is therapeutic. Set boundaries, reduce digital noise, schedule intentional solitude, and find guided psychotherapeutic work that honors somatic signals. Join community margins like small reading groups or retreats where depth is modeled, not weaponized. These are interventions that preserve consciousness and allow later service to the world. 1 month in many people notice reduced reactivity, less stomach tightness, and clearer sleep. 3 months often brings the emergence of new creative forms of work or more honest relationships. 6 months tends to show integration, a persona that feels less like a mask and more like an instrument. After these intervals, people report a capacity to hold collective difficulty without dissolving and to speak from a place of deeper calibration. Deserting the center is not the end of moral commitment. It is a strategic preservation of capacity. Jung taught that some must retreat so that later they can return with insight and a tempered presence. The disappearance of awakened souls is not simply loss. It is a cultural gestation. The hope is that those who withdraw do not vanish forever, but come back in different roles with new capacities. If this conversation helped, subscribe to follow more explorations on individuation, shadow work, and practical hermitage. And remember, if you feel the pull, give yourself experiments, small limits, and a witness who can hold the process. You are not abandoning the world. You may be preparing to serve it differently. Thank you for making it this far.